Yeah, I wanted to talk about the epidemic of sophistry because we've had this film emerge this week, which you and I have not seen. It's paywalled, but we've certainly seen clips of it. What is a Woman? A Matt Walsh piece. And it has sparked a number of, investigations of that question. And it alerted me to one thing that I thought needed exploring. There is a trick that is played. It's a legalistic trick. And the trick is, you say, women's sports should only include people who, born females. Are you able to define those terms, right? And the implication is that a failure to be able to define a term indicates that you're a poser for using that term. Certainly you shouldn't be using terms you can't define. In fact, that's not the case. In fact, we do this all the time. And in fact, you would be utterly hobbled in communicating almost anything if you only were allowed to use words that you could define with a reasonable degree of precision.
Yeah.
And so actually, Zach, would you put up my elephant tweet? I put up the following thought experiment. I said, consider this. If we choose 1,000 adults at random and ask them to define elephant, it is unlikely that any of them could do it. But if we showed each of them 1,000 animals, only one of which was an elephant, they would all identify it correctly. Okay. Now, what do I mean by this? Lots of people came back and they said, well, I think lots of people could do a decent job defining an elephant. No, I promise you can't, because the definition of an elephant is inherently phylogenetic. The definition is an elephant is the descendant of the most recent common ancestor of all elephants.
People are going to hate that.
They're going to hate it, but that's
secular, using elephant to define elephants. It's just true, though.
It's just simply true. And anything else you try to do runs afoul of all kinds of ambiguities, right? If you try to define it based on the large ears, the large stature, the trunk, whatever it is, the point is you're giving characteristics that will help you recognize one. And indeed, they are characteristics that will help you recognize one, but they don't define elephant. And so the point is, for 1,000 people chosen at random to be able to identify an elephant from 1,000 animals chosen at random, that says that there is something unambiguous about elephantness, right? It does not, the ability to recognize that thing does not depend on your ability to spell out what the sine qua non of elephantness is, right? And so my basic point is we all know what a woman is, right? In fact, in this case, the definition is pretty simple, and we've gotten shy about it because we're afraid of all of the questions about ambiguities at the edge that we can't answer, even though there is no fundamental ambiguity.
Zach, you can put up my screen now. So this is not your point,
right?
But one of the points here is actually every human being past a certain age should be able to easily define what a woman is, just as they can define what a man is. And I did so in the end of March on my Substack in a piece I called I Am a Woman and a Biologist. And no, you shouldn't need to be a biologist to be able to do this. A woman, of course, is an adult human female, and I then define adult human and female, female being the point on which people seem very interested in being sophists. Females, I posit, are individuals who do or did or will or would, but for developmental or genetic anomalies, produce eggs. Eggs are large sessile gametes. Gametes are sex cells. In plants and animals and most other sexually reproducing organisms, there are two sexes, female and male. Like adult, the term female applies across many species. Female is used to distinguish such people from males who produce, do or did or will or would, but for development or genetic anomalies, produce small mobile gametes, that is to say sperm, or in the case of plants, pollen. So right. In this case, there is a simple definition, and everyone actually should be able to have that right at the tip of their fingertips. But, the elephant question, not now, not here. It'd be interesting to get into, how does asking people to define elephant differ from asking people to define woman?
Yeah.
And part of the issue, although they are both biological at one level, is that elephant is a lineage.
Yeah.
And female is not. Woman is not. a lineage. And this is part of why actually sex is completely different from, for instance, race. And so we lump things like sex and race together when we talk about privilege and discrimination and all of this. But sex and race are completely different kinds of concepts. And whereas elephant is a solid lineage concept within evolutionary biology, race, not so much, but at least it alludes to the idea of lineages, and sex doesn't at all, because we all come from an equal number of male and female ancestors.
So let's take that.
Well, unless you go back far enough to the asexual stuff, at which point we all come from 100% female ancestors.
Right. So let's take those three cases, right?
Elephant, race, and sex.
Elephant, race, and sex. Because what this really says, and in fact, if you would put up that other tweet, a Twitter mutual, a friend of mine, Amazon Eve, who I believe is a trans person, challenged what I had said on Twitter and asked me, well, if you're going to do this with sex effectively, why not race? And the answer is,
you don't get to have it both ways.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to have it both ways. Yeah. But what I want to do is apply the exactly right toolkit and get exactly the amount of biological information in each of these categories. And here's what you've got. Elephant, when Heather says elephant is a lineage, it's a clade, right? There is zero ambiguity about what is and isn't an elephant, because there was a most recent common ancestor of all of the elephants, and there is the set of all of its descendants. You are either descended from that animal or you are not. If you are not, you are not an elephant. If you are inherently an elephant, no matter what you look like.
So not to say that we will ever have that degree of precision, right? So you said there's zero ambiguity, but hearkening back to what we were talking about early on in this episode, the fact that science is a toolkit designed to align what we understand to be true as closely as possible with what is actually true. That doesn't mean that we will ever 100% get there, nor that we will know that we are there when we do get there.
Well, no, this is a matter of logical necessity. In other words, if I meet a person, let's say that I meet a person who was dropped on the doorstep of an orphanage, right, as an infant, has no memory of what took place before the event, only develops the ability to have memory after they've already become a member of the orphanage, right? I can say that this person had two grandmothers. I can't say who they were, right? But I can say that this person had two grandmothers and two grandfathers, right? And they had one mother and one father, right? That's just a matter of logical necessity.
Yes, so, I'm just talking about the boundaries of elephantness.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. The point is, I don't even, the term elephant, it occurred to me as we launched into this, that we could be saying proboscidean, right? We could take the larger clade of elephant-like things, or we could take elephant as, one of two species, right? Who are extant species. It doesn't matter. The point is, you tell me which thing you want to define, and I'll tell you that the definition is the same. It's any descendant of the most recent common ancestor of that group. So
operational, not so much, but that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to define it carefully,
just trying to say what it is that all of those people who identified the 1 in 1,000 creatures as an elephant have identified, is that they've identified the descendant of that most recent common ancestor.
And their failure to come up with a scientific definition says nothing about their ability to actually recognize an elephant from an array, from a lineup.
Right, which we know because they'll all agree on which the elephant is.
Exactly.
Right? So we know it's real. We just can't specify exactly how they got there, but it's really unambiguous. Now, the thing is, as you point out, woman is not a lineage, right? Because woman is like, you take a lineage, the human lineage, and then you turn off half of it by virtue of a developmental switch that went one way or the other in each person, right? Now, in some places, it may have been ambiguous, but your point has been from the beginning that there is a thing which, as far as we know, is never ambiguous. Which type of gametes do you make or would you make if you had been intact? And so the point is it the same as lineage? No. Is it biologically ambiguous? No.
That's right.
So the point is you can do the thing there. So what about Amazon Eve's point about race? Well, you can do this there too. And the fact is, race isn't the same kind of thing as woman, and it isn't the same kind of thing as elephant, right? Because let's say that you had two people who were as embedded in a given race as anybody ever is, right? You take somebody who is as close to, I don't know.
How about Maasai or Han Chinese?
Okay, Han Chinese and Maasai, right? They fall in love. They have an offspring. What race is it? Well, razor's edge between those two. I don't know, right? Does that mean that Maasai doesn't exist? No, it certainly doesn't. Does it mean Han Chinese doesn't exist? No, it doesn't. What it means is that we know the edges of this concept, whatever its biological nature is, are imprecise, right? Does that invalidate it? No. When does a pond become a lake? Right? Are there lakes? Are there ponds? Can we talk about the different kinds of creatures that tend to inhabit them? We can. Is there an exact, cubic centimeter of water that causes something to jump from one category to the next? No. Is that a crippling fact? No. So
I mean, we often talk about the fuzzy borders in biology not demonstrating anything about the lack of reality of the categories. So, as you descend a mountain into a valley, our inability to say exactly at what point the mountain becomes the valley doesn't render either the concept of mountain or valley unreal.
And in fact, that because the river will be in the valley.
That is one way that you know that, I would say. Same thing with a pond and a lake. The distinction between them seems even more fuzzy, but that is a little tricky. It's a little tricky to invoke precisely here because, in fact, what renders lineage fuzzy is because of sexual reproduction, right? And in fact, actually, the clip from our private Q&A that was actually released today, I think, is us talking a bit about lineage selection and showing a visual that my graduate advisor, Arnold Kluge, used to show with, individuals making choices about reproduction and, making babies and them going on to make babies with other individuals. And, you scale out and out and out in time, not in space. And you end up with these neatly bifurcating trees that say, and then this species became 2 species, became 4 species, et cetera. And that elides a whole bunch of the actual stuff that happens at the closer in level temporally, where, you and I have created a lineage with our 2 children, but we do not come from the same lineage. And right. So there is a fractal nature of lineage, but also a reticulating nature of lineage that makes it very different. And, it explains, you can pick 2 very distinct and relatively homogeneous populations on the earth, like Han and Maasai, and say they're unlikely to have very many recent ancestors in common, say within the last, I don't even know, at least within the last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay. But do they actually share an ancestor? Of course.
Yeah.
We all do. We all 100% do, right? So it depends on how far back you're going. And so it scales and it's fractal, and lineage is both real and also reticulating. And it depends on, you have to specify what you're talking about. And so with regard to elephant, it sounds like a circular definition, but it's actually not. An elephant is all of the members, all of the descendants of the most recent common ancestor of elephants. Mm-hmm. We can't do that with, you could do that with human, you can do that with Homo sapiens without ever, being able to or being forced to define who that first Homo sapiens was. We can't do that with race because race doesn't work that way, right? Because we are too reticulated, because we are too intermixed, and we always have been and we always will be.
So I want to point out the bad mental habit that this reveals.
Yeah.
The reason that we get into trouble about this, right? The reason that people say, well, if you're going to do that with sex, then, you're going to be forced to do it about race. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, do what?
Right.
Do science? Sure. Let's.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point is, there is a sense that, look, you're telling us what team you're on. At the point that you start saying, look, the thing that defines what sex you are is what gametes you are built to produce. Right? Well, then you're going to get stuck with that when it comes to race or something like this. And the point is, look, if we take you to a forest, right, and we say, look, I want to show you something about this forest. Come with us, right? And we lead you into the forest. And then we have...
promise to bring you back.
Yeah. And then, okay, check this out. We've got an electron microscope.
In the forest?
In the forest with a long
seems like a bad
extension.
Choice.
Yeah, it's going to melt. But anyway.
No, the fungus is going to eat it.
Yeah. It's going to disintegrate into the forest at some point. But my point is, look, is the truth of the things that you need an electron microscope to see in the forest somehow not the forest? No, of course it is, right? We can look at the structures inside the cells of the creatures of the forest. We can zoom out and we can see entire organisms in the forest. We can look at how the forest changes over time, the ebb and flow of the different species. All of these things are elements of the forest. And the point is, our job as biologists is to apply exactly the right biology at exactly the right way so that the conclusions that are built out of it are actually robust, right? Mm-hmm. Is it possible to do it perfectly? No. But the point is, let's do as well as we can. Just as, is it possible to play a perfect game of tennis? I doubt it, right? But you play as well as you can. So the point is, look, is biology relevant to race? Of course it is. Is biology relevant to sex? Of course it is, right? Is it relevant to...
Does it apply the same way to both? Of course it does not.
Right. There are pieces that do. There are pieces that don't. And so, look, that's all we're saying is, you've got this toolkit. It's full of the most amazing stuff, and it applies to all the questions you care about. Can we figure out how to apply it so that it is revealing to everybody, right? It doesn't... it doesn't hand a win to some team, right? You get a complex, interesting result that you'll then have to grapple with the implications of. But why wouldn't you do it? Why would you relegate yourself to a universe of teams, right? The team thing, it's a loser. It's not, and in fact, it goes exactly to the conclusion of that Patterson essay. The fact is, this is not a productive mechanism for figuring out what's right? The team thing is a loser, and we are losing the advantage that comes from not dealing with things that way for the lack of the appropriate toolkit.